Hey everybody, Tom Lepa here. Glad that you're tuning in. Today's study is going to be Revelation chapter 6. So let me go to the slideshow, bring this into full screen uh, for your education. Okay, well, there's a full screen. I should be in a small guy in the corner somewhere. Revelation chapter 6 is going to be our study today, but we're not going to really do chapter 6. This is more or less an introduction chapters to chapter 6, but I did want to say a few things regards to it. Now, Jesus is going to open all seven seals. But in chapter 6, we have 6 out of 7 seals that are revealed. 6 out of 7 seals revealed in chapter 6. So we're talking about 6 a lot there. But eventually he will open all 7. But in order for me to do this study, we got to take some time and do a review of history. Revelation, in this sense, is going to be a book of history in a sense that I need to share some things going on in and around Jerusalem, probably around from 64 to 66 AD. A lot will be taking place, and I want you to get an understanding of this. So let's just read verse 1 of chapter 6, and I will lead into the next area of study. Amen. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard as it were the noise of thunder. And then he says, one of the 4 beasts saying, come and see. Now I'm going to talk about throughout chapter 6 will be the 4 horsemen are going to be revealed to us. But I wanted you to hear this first verse because it's going to show itself up in interesting ways throughout the chapter. So one of the 4 beasts are saying, then there will be the second beast, and it will say something, the third beast and the fourth beast. These 4 beasts bring us back to chapter 1, don't they? So it's interesting that we have a continuation or a thought going on. Now, the 4 horsemen, the white horse, the red horse, the black horse, and the pale horse, are here listed. This will take us throughout chapter 6. But since I'm not going to do this study today, this is simply saying to you what we will find in this chapter. And I would especially want to highlight the white horse. I've gone back and forth with the white horse. I've said, could this be Jesus? I mean, it makes sense that it is. Later on in Revelation, he is going to be mounting a white horse, which is a horse that does show victory and triumph, and it's just amazing of what it brings forth. It shows something that is, taking place. But then on the other hand, I said, well, maybe it's not Jesus. Here's why. Because Jesus is opening one of the seals. And in the first seal is going to be a white horse. And so you're thinking, well, wait a minute, what's going on there? Or the 4 horsemen are revealed in this. Anyway, I just want to say that as starting this out. So that's something to think about. But notice that it says, and the Lamb opened one of the seals. And so we have a seal that's being opened of this scroll that was hidden until now. I think that's pretty fantastic. So let me read this to you. A look back at history to why the Romans were in Judea and Jerusalem in the first place. They conquered the land, they took it. They went in and did what they do. But in so doing, and as their custom was, a lot of times they didn't just do away with the population like other nations had done, but they went in and they just kind of assumed the land. And they let the people still have some kind of freedom, of which the Jewish people had, but there would be a heavy hand over them. And they didn't like that heavy hand. So, in order for us to understand chapter 6, we need to do this brief history of Rome that took place in the middle to the late first century. And so as we look at that now, the middle to the late first century, that brings us all the way up around 100 AD. But the Romans will occupy Jerusalem and Judea with an iron fist. So in the late 50s of that first century to the early 60s, there was a Roman person named Gessius Florus. And then from 64 to 66 AD, he was called upon to control the Jewish people. Why? Well, the Jewish people were tired of Rome's strict presence in Jerusalem. Now, remember back to when Jesus was crucified. Pontius Pilate was not of the Jewish religion or the Jewish sect. He was a Roman, given orders to go there in this political position in the city. And so when Jesus was there about 30 AD or 33 AD, he stands before the people and Pontius Pilate says, "Look at your king, behold your king." And then they yelled back, "We have no king but Caesar." That's important to note. Now you say, well, God just overlooked it. He did not overlook that at all. The Lord says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." There'll be none other but He Himself. When they said those words, they were not only giving in to the Romans, but they were violating that commandment, and they did not stand guiltless when they did. Now, there were uprisings going on. This means little pockets of resistance. And there would be a flare up over here. The Romans handled those, no problem. A flare up over here. They could handle it. They didn't like it, but that's the kind of rule that they had over Judea and Jerusalem. And when this guy Gessius comes into Jerusalem, 64 to 66 AD, he was called upon to control the Jewish people. And they were tired of Rome's strict presence in Jerusalem. But he did something wrong. He didn't come in as a friend. He didn't come in as one just to kind of, make peace with the Jewish people as best as he could. He had a strong arm approach, and it was not well taken by the population. He even raided the Jewish temple, the Holy of Holies part of it. And he took the money that was in the temple for himself. Can you imagine the anger of the Jewish people? It would come to the point where they would be so angry at him that I think it borderlined hating this man. So into the picture we have Josephus. Let me read this to you because this is some of my studies that I put together. Gessius's approach was high taxation. Notice that. Levied against the Jewish people, and for his extreme corruption and anti-Jewish provocations, he was just not well liked. He held a position of governance of the region, which included Jerusalem, but he provoked them. He would provoke the Hebrew population to loathe him in a deep and despised way. Now, how do we know this? Is there any record of that? Well, I'm going to share with you the full name of someone who recorded these events. His name was Titus Flavius Josephus. He was a Jewish historian during this period of history. You may know him only as Josephus, but his real name, his Hebrew name, is Joseph ben Metayahu. That sounds a lot like the guy that rules in Israel right now, the president. He was born into a strict Hebrew priestly family where he learned the Torah and the scriptures and earned the title as Pharisees. I think there is some comparison people do in history between this man, Josephus, and the Apostle Paul, although Josephus never claimed to be a Christian. but his writings are with us today. It's pretty amazing. Now, here's what he said. This is a quote. He said that the first Jewish revolt was a direct cause from Gessius Florus and his reign of terror. The reason this is important is that the said war was that it laid a foundation for the mounting unrest and the distrust of Roman occupation. Put that name, Gessius Florus, into your head and remember it because he predated the accounts that would take place in just a few years from his going to Rome or Jerusalem in that year. Gessius, brought forth, I mean, he tried to push these people down. He despised them. Now, consider this also. Let's consider the date of all this. Josephus wrote his history. He would write it later in his life, not at this moment. He wasn't like he was taking notes while he's in this whole thing going on. He started out as one that was rebelling against the Roman occupation, and he started out that way. But later he was captured, and it's quite a long story that I'll get into later. But he ended up being a translator for Titus to the Jewish people and really did his best to try to let them know of the terrible thing that would happen to them. And he was trying to tell them, you need to just give up. You need not to stand against the Roman Titus, the Roman general. But consider the date of this. Consider this date. It is placed directly in the Christian era, and men like Peter, Paul, Barnabas, James, Stephen, Philip, a host of others. I mean, you could go on and on of those that you would remember. They were writing their books from 40 to about 66 AD. They were writing their letters. And right in the midst of all this was taking place in Jerusalem. And Peter was right there in the city. He was the leader of the church in those days. But men like Barnabas would go with Paul on missionary trips, but others like Philip would witness to the Samaritans, and Stephen would be stoned to death, and James would be the one James would be killed with the sword. But this was all contemporary of Josephus and the things that were leading up to 70 AD. Josephus was an eyewitness, and he says that this revolt that was happening in 66 AD, later in the year, was brought on by this guy, Gessius Florus. A second thing that took place, and this is amazing when you read about this. The second thing that took place prior to Caesar Nero to send General Vespasian to Jerusalem in 66 AD was the humiliating defeat of a Roman legion from Syria under the command of Setius Gallus. Setius found himself trapped at the pass of Beth Horon, where his legion was destroyed and they fled. Now, the Romans had a lot of pride in their legions, their army, well trained beyond belief. But something happened at that pass, Beth Horon, at that time, and the Roman army, the legion, was just completely dismantled, basically. They fled, they ran, they departed. But this is why this is an important lesson today. That was leading up to something else. So the first blow came when that guy, let me go back if I can. Gessius Florus brought just awful taxation on the people and even robbed the temple. So this is now the second blow. So the stage is set for something bigger and deeper. Caesar Nero must have felt, I mean, I know he just got the news of that. I don't know what he felt, but it had to be something deep in his heart of anger, frustration. And then how could this happen to this wonderful army that had conquered the known world by that time? What took place for his legion of warriors to be just scattered? Well, his thought was what he did. This is part of the history I'm telling you about. He needed a stronger and larger Roman army to defeat this uprising. But this time it was not considered only a minor setback. So something changed in this time. He went from just wanting to put down these little uprisings, and this anger got into him. This thing got into his being to completely destroy any power that the Jewish people had, no matter what the cost would be. In other words, here's the bottom line. The nation would not exist as they had been since the time Rome occupied Israel up until 70 AD, but he wasn't messing around. Nero was not going to just look the other way. He said, I want them destroyed. I want Jerusalem gone. I want to take the city. I don't know if at that time he considered destroying the temple, but that would happen when Titus came into the city. But the big thing is that he wanted to destroy the city. Now, so this is the final blow. Okay, we have another name here. Think about the name, the first two words of this guy's name, Titus Flavius Vespasianus. Can't say it. Vespasian is who it is, the Roman general. He was called to take on this responsibility, and it would be no easy task. Now, Jerusalem, let's talk about that for a moment. Over the years, now we're going to bring in Herod the Great into this picture and other people related to the Herod. There would be more than one Herod, by the way, that would be adding on to the temple, but they would make it into a beautiful edifice. So much so that the disciples would even look at it and say, look at these beautiful stones. I've read where you couldn't put a piece of paper in between the stones. When these guys were finishing these beautiful stones, they did it with such precision that they were put together. It wasn't like we had mortar to make it look better. It was done by chisel and by experience. But the disciples, look at the beautiful stones. And then Jesus said, not one stone will be left upon another. They're all coming down. What? Impossible. Well, let's get back to our study today. So, Caesar Nero sends Vespasian, General Vespasian, to where? Judea. And he starts the process. But along with him is his son, Titus. And Titus is also a very skilled Roman general and knowledge of how to take and how to use all the Roman might against places. Now, let me just share this very quickly. In 67 AD, and right in the process of overtaking Judea and on his way to Jerusalem, Caesar Nero commits suicide June 8th, 68 AD, which ushered in the year of the four Caesars. Well, it'd be a little bit over a year, but there would be four Caesars, and Rome was in a civil war, and right in the midst of this time in Jerusalem and this war going on in Judea, they call upon Vespasian to come back to Rome and to take on being the leader of Rome or the Caesar of Rome. And it was a good move. He saved them from the civil war. But he leaves to go to Rome, and in his place is Titus. Now, I've said all this to tell you that the stage is now set. Titus comes in, and he is now right on Jerusalem. This 3.5 year war is taking place, which is really the Great Tribulation that you read about. But it's already happened. It took place during this era. And this whole revolt and that is taking place is more than that now. It's being put down completely. It's all recorded by Josephus. And so remember, he's a contemporary of all these events. So, when I read Josephus, and I've read the history and enjoyed every bit of it, it's amazing what he wrote down, and he really gets into detail. But one of the things that I had to come to grips with, and as you do too, is that he is the one and only literal source that's given us these words. And because of that, people think, well, he's exaggerating here, he's making it up over here, he's adding to the story over here. To be honest with you, we don't know. Why? Because we weren't there. He was there. And what he wrote, he wrote. And later on, Titus, he would be the new Caesar, and he would say, this is good. I agree with everything he wrote. It's what took place. So, you say, well, there's only one source. Yeah, only one, Josephus. But he did a good job. So don't give up on him and read these things that we write today, or some have written, not me. I know better than that, but to say, well, he exaggerated the number of deaths in Jerusalem, because, well, how do you count that many people stacked upon another? And, well, you can't. But they say, well, he was exaggerating. Well, how do they know? That's my question to them. They don't. They just think they do. Okay. So, in the final point there, the bullet point, it says the next person in line of finishing the Jewish revolt was Vespasian's son Titus. He marched into the wall of Jerusalem, up to the wall, with 4 legions. Remember, the other guy had 1, and began the terrible work to make the Jews surrender. It's all recorded. Now, I said earlier, there's not 1 wall they had to work through, but 2. And in the meantime, while this is taking place, the Jews inside the city built a 3rd wall. And Josephus says it was a makeshift wall, whatever that means. It wasn't as strong as the other 2. But this wall was thick. This wall was big. And there was a couple of sides that you couldn't even get close to scaling the whole hillside to take it on. Now, Josephus is a contemporary of all that is going on. I look at him as a good authority. All right. These historical facts apply to Revelation, but how? So we come back to the book of Revelation. Now I'm going to be proving this later on, but for today, I'm saying this. It is not written in the early 90s as today's popular belief goes, but it is written in the late 60s AD, or around 67 to 69 AD. Now, why is this important? Here it is. I will offer 2 important reasons. First, the judgment from the Lord upon the holy city, Jerusalem, was for all their sins and their abuse of God's temple, and those things that are written from Revelation 6 to 22. It is a terrible time of judgment, as you will see, and it actually coincides with Josephus and what he writes about. Amen. Secondly, there's internal proof of an earlier date. Here it is. The temple is still standing when John is told to measure the temple. In 95 AD, that would be impossible because the temple would be gone in 70 AD, and there was no rebuilding of that temple. And there's no temple today in Jerusalem. There's the Muslims have the Dome on the Rock, as it's called. So historically, 70 AD date, a date not contested with all these things. So that's reason one, and there'll be reason two in a moment. But this internal evidence is very important. Then the reason number two, the statements found in Revelation, chapter 1, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 3, chapter 3, verse 11, chapter 27, verse 7, and chapter 22. I didn't mark it down, but it's just at the end of that 22nd chapter. It says, shortly and soon mean what they say. It would be happening within their lifestyles. Now, this tells you why there was such a revolt or a huge Roman presence in 67 to 70 AD. Well, let's take a look here at some things, okay? And this will be my conclusion. Revelation or unveiling reveals things that must shortly come to pass, or from 66 AD to 70 AD, approximately 3.5 years. That should sound familiar to those who study the book of Revelation. It coincides with Daniel and Revelation on the length of the Great Tribulation, 3.5 years. Daniel says for a time, times, and half a time. Everybody agrees that that's 3.5 years. Daniel also mentions 1,290 days, which is 3.5 years. But he also mentions 1,335 days. The latter number, 1,335, probably refers to the destruction of the temple as the final blow on Jerusalem. And Titus did not want to destroy the temple. He wanted it to stand. He gave orders that they wouldn't destroy the temple. And it caught on fire. And when it caught on fire, you couldn't put it out. Hey, I'm going to give you a little side note. This is really interesting. So think of the fire at the temple in 70 AD. As the flames are burning, the heat is intense, and the gold is melting. There was a lot of gold in the temple, and it is melting, and it is going in between these rocks that have fallen on top of one another now. And the gold is in these crevices and in these little areas. And so after this is all said and done, after it's been done and now it's cooled off and the Rome is still there, and the soldiers go in and they begin to chisel out all the gold that they were coming upon. And in so doing, they were overturning big stones, little stones. They were making, maybe cracking the big stones into littler stones. I don't know what they were doing exactly, but they were going in and to harvest all the gold in the temple, making it even more like Jesus said, not one stone will be left upon another. It wasn't just a tumbling down event, but it was that these guys were going looking for the gold, and they were looking at every crevice they could to get it. So this is the final blow, 3.5 years of great tribulation. Erase from your head this whole idea of 7 years of great tribulation. That is not true. This was 3.5 years. And this is the only thing that fits naturally according to the time-related texts and according to what Titus did in destroying the temple in 70 AD. It's the only thing that makes sense. The other things, you have to make them fit. And finally, which I didn't have in my notes here, there has to be a new temple built in Jerusalem. And I don't think that's going to take place at least anytime soon. And well, with this teaching, there's no need for a second temple. We are the children of God, the ecclesia, the called out ones, and we worship Jesus, who's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. There's no need for a temple where there's a bunch of slaughtering of sheep and goats and bulls and all that kind of stuff. No, it's gone. It's done. Thank God that it is. I bring a close to my teaching today. Probably have to just close out of here. I don't know if I'm big or not, but anyway, goodbye. Thank you for joining in, and we're going to end right now. Now.